This morning's edition of Swamp Watch focuses on the State Department today. Top officials there under fire after a new report from the department's Inspector General. The report, first obtained by Politico, finds officials, quote, engaged in disrespectful and hostile treatment of staffers over suspicions that they were, quote, disloyal based on their perceived political views. It is the first of two reports from the Inspector General that looks into allegations that President Trump's political appointees retaliated against career employees. The second report has not yet been completed. I am joined now by Philippe Reines, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and co-host of the Unredacted podcast. And once again, Nayyera, former State Department Senior Advisor, is back with us. Philippe, let me begin with you. I want to read you a little bit of this. I'm going to outline some of the main findings from the report. It includes that they found that the Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of International Organization Affairs, that is Kevin Maloney, and Mari Stull, another senior political appointee, engaged in, quote, disrespectful and hostile treatment of employees, made accusations of disloyalty and harassment based on perceived political views, and retaliated based on conflicts of interest. Pretty damaging assessment there. What is the long-term impact of these findings when you find that political appointees are doing this kind of behavior against career employees?
Well, it's terrible, both long-term and short-term. And what we're seeing is this being done by the White House to the entire State Department. It's important, I think, for the viewers to understand that when you say Bureau of International Organizations, that's actually code for, among other things, United Nations. And it's no coincidence that part of these hostile actions and these intimidation techniques are happening in the part of the State Department that handles the UN when it's people like Josh Bolton and Steve Bannon and Trump himself who belittled and flat out hate the UN. They'd be happy if it was dismantled. Now, irrespective of your politics, it's important to realize, and I was a political appointee for 4 years, and I worked with Nayyera closely, and, you know, the department is unique in that it has two sets primarily of people. It has civil servants and the Foreign Service. Foreign Service officers are what you typically imagine as diplomats. And we send them overseas for 2 to 3 year stints. It's actually pretty akin to the military. There is no one more loyal to America than these Foreign Service officers. This is not fun and games. They're not all going to London and Paris and Rome. They are being deployed to places like Yemen, dangerous parts of Iraq, of Afghanistan, of Pakistan. They're going to places in Africa where they can't eat anything that's not cooked to death because otherwise they'll get sick and their hair gets brittle. I was lucky to meet hundreds, if not thousands, of these folks around the world working for Senator Clinton. I could never tell whether or not they were Democratic or Republican. I'm not sure they were. That's not why they signed up for this. And you mentioned the second report, which will focus on the S staff, which is what we call the people who work directly for the secretary. And I think that's going to be much more devastating. And it's going to come down to these people are nothing but vindictive and paranoia.
So the question then becomes, Nayyera, to Philippe's point, this is a culture that is created inside the State Department. It's got to stop somewhere. Should Secretary of State Mike Pompeo ultimately be held responsible for these findings, for the culture that exists within the State Department that he is the head of?
Well, absolutely, but let's not forget the fish rots at the head. This is ultimately about a president who has made the presidency about himself, and he's appointed people who are continuing that idea that it's about them and their ideology. The State Department, the Pentagon, the outward-facing, external-looking places are the ones where traditionally people rise above partisanship. They are serving their country. They are serving public good, and that's why they're there. This is the inability of any political appointee in the Trump administration, including the ones at the top, to realize that it's about more than just their own financial interests. It's about more than just their own ideology. It's about the safety and security of Americans abroad. Even prior to Secretary Pompeo, you had a hiring freeze instilled by Tillerson. They tried to redo the entire State Department along business lines, not realizing that in the process of this hiring freeze, they've ended up spending more money because the people who are there have to work overtime and travel more. So they're trying to apply these principles of their own egos and their own business experience that just doesn't work in national security.
Philippe, one more for you, and this is the accusation that employees reported in particular that I wanted to focus on, which is this. The report finds that career employees told the Office of Inspector General that Ms. Stull accused them of being part of the, quote, deep state, and that the assistant secretary also accused them of, quote, undermining the president's agenda. As somebody who's worked at the highest levels of the State Department, how do you draw the line between what is rightfully an agenda of a president, which he is allowed to implement in foreign policy, and then making that accusation that you are undermining, you're part of a deep state undermining that agenda? What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think there are two things to make clear. First, there is no deep state. There is just the state.
Right.
We see what they do, for better or for worse. Two, the only person undermining Donald Trump's foreign policy agenda is Donald Trump. This has nothing to do with the people of the State Department. You have people who have been there for 6 or 7 presidents, people who started under Nixon or Reagan or Carter or Bush or Clinton. And they served Condi Rice as much as they served Madeleine Albright, because they joined to carry out the American foreign policy. And it's disgusting, and it's causing a huge brain drain at the State Department. You have people by the hundreds not renewing after being there for years. They're leaving. And you have the applications to the Foreign Service have absolutely plummeted.
All right, Philippe Reines, Nayyera Haq, thank you both very much.